devil wears my dad's face. When I was 8 years old, I learned how to read the air in a room. Some kids memorized multiplication tables or played make-believe. I learned to gauge the weight of silence, to recognize the sharpness of footsteps on the floor, to interpret the tone of a sigh. It became second nature, a skill I didn't even know I had until much later. Survival has a way of teaching you things without asking if you're ready to learn. My father wasn't always angry. At least, I don't think he was. I have vague memories of him sitting in his recliner, a cigarette balanced between his fingers, laughing at something on the television. Those moments were rare though, and as I grew older, they felt more like pieces of someone else's life that I had accidentally wandered into. The man I remember most clearly was the one who filled every corner of our house with his rage. It wasn't the kind of anger that exploded all at once. No, it was slower than that. It simmered, building under the surface until the smallest spark set it off. A glass left on the table, a shoe not placed neatly by the door, a toy left in the wrong room. Those were the kinds of things that turned his voice into a weapon, his hands into something I flinched away from. My mother never got in the way. She had learned her lessons long before I was old enough to notice. She kept her head down, her voice quiet, her movements careful. I used to wonder why she didn't leave, why she stayed and let him do what he did. But as I grew older, I began to understand. Fear is a powerful thing. It roots you in place, wraps itself around you until escape feels impossible. I was 10 the first time I tried to run away. I had packed a bag with some clothes, a book, and the little bit of cash I had saved from doing odd jobs for the neighbors. I waited until the house was dark and silent, my father's snores rumbling through the walls, before I slipped out the back door. The night air was cold, but it felt good on my skin, like freedom. I made it 3 blocks before I stopped, sitting on the curb and staring at the empty street ahead of me. I didn't know where to go. I didn't know who to call. I sat there until the sun started to rise. Then I walked back home. He never found out about that night. If he had, I don't know what he would have done. The thought of it kept me from trying again. By the time I was 14, I had learned how to stay out of his way. I spent most of my time in my room, the door closed and locked whenever I could get away with it. I kept my music low and my movements quiet. When he was home, I tried to become invisible. Sometimes it worked. Other times, it didn't matter what I did. He would find me anyway, his voice sharp and cutting, his hands heavy and unrelenting. One night, he came home drunk. That wasn't unusual, but something about the way he moved that night scared me more than usual. He stumbled through the house, slamming doors and muttering under his breath. I stayed in my room, my heart pounding in my chest, waiting for the inevitable. When he finally reached my door, I could hear the anger in his voice before he even spoke. "Open the door," he growled. I didn't move. I thought maybe if I stayed quiet, he would leave. I said, "Open the door." The doorknob rattled, then shook harder as he tried to force it open. I pressed myself against the far wall, my hands trembling. "I know you're in there," he shouted. "Open this door right now or I swear." The sound of wood splintering filled the room as he kicked the door open. I froze, unable to move as he stepped inside, his face twisted in fury. "What the hell is wrong with you?" he demanded, his words slurred. "You think you can lock me out of my own house?" I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out. My throat felt like it was closing, my chest tightening as panic took over. He stepped closer, his hand raised. I flinched, bracing for the impact, but it never came. Instead, he grabbed the lamp on my bedside table and hurled it against the wall. The sound of shattering glass made me jump, tears streaming down my face as I curled into myself. "Clean it up," he said, his voice cold. Then he turned and walked out, leaving the door hanging off its hinges. I didn't move for a long time. When I finally did, my hands shook so badly I could barely hold the broom. I swept up the broken glass and threw it away, then sat on my bed and stared at the floor until the sun came up. That night was a turning point for me. I realized then that I couldn't keep living like this. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew I had to find a way out. I started saving money, taking on any job I could find. I spent hours at the library, researching ways to get emancipated, looking up shelters and resources for kids like me. It wasn't easy. It took years of planning and waiting, of pretending everything was fine while I worked toward my escape. But eventually, I did it. I packed